Today's in-person meeting between Mark Carney and President Donald Trump was the second since Carney became Prime Minister. Canadian officials say they've agreed to accelerate negotiations toward a trade deal and that they're already setting up another meeting for later this week. So, what happened between the leaders today? Kirsten Hillman is Canada's ambassador to the United States, and she joins me now. Ambassador, thank you so much for squeezing us in on a busy day. I'm hoping you can provide a few more details about where things have gone. You said today you have felt a sense of acceleration in these talks, but you're in the middle of discussions, not at the end of discussions. Have the two countries moved appreciably closer to getting a deal here?
Well, I think that every time we meet, we move a little bit closer. And I know that's probably not terribly satisfactory when we're trying to explain to Canadians the steps towards a date and be able to say by date certain we think we're going to be there. Unfortunately, I'm not able to, be that precise with you. But what I can say is we had a good meeting. So the Prime Minister and the President had a private meeting before the rest of the delegation came in. Then the delegation came in. We spent an awful lot of time. We talked about other things, but we spent a lot of time talking about trade and tariffs and economic partnership and making sure that we are, working in a way that supports both of our economies. And we were asked by the leaders to try to accelerate the pace of our discussions. So that, I think, is really good. It led to immediately a meeting just very shortly thereafter with Ambassador Greer and Minister LeBlanc and I and a few others. And that's a very positive thing. And we're going to meet again before the end of the week. So that is an acceleration. Right. I think we're trying to get to the right place. It's very hard to quantify for your viewers in sort of real terms because there's a lot under discussion.
Right, and look, in every negotiation, nothing is done until everything is done, especially in a conversation like this. But I just wonder about a comment the President made after his meeting with the Prime Minister this morning. He said a deal is achievable within days or weeks. Does Canada share the President's optimism there on that timeline?
Look, I hope so. It would be great. If we could have a deal within days or weeks, then that would be fantastic. And I think based on the way in which our economies are intertwined, based upon the value proposition that we pose for the U.S. in terms of the objectives that it has for its country, for its economy, it is doable. But they have to also, put the Canadian side back into a place where we are not being harmed by their tariff policy, where we have some stability and certainty for the future, as much as that is possible in this very complicated global world that we're in. So I hope so. That will require a fairly hearty discussion on both sides of the table. But it's great to hear that the President thinks so, and I think that's a really important message for his team as well.
I wonder if you can help me understand something the President said today, and I know you're limited in what details you can share, Ambassador, but he said he's a tariff person. He said the Prime Minister has something that's more complex. I mean, more complex, is that simply getting back to like a trade agreement, which is obviously a more complex thing than across-the-board tariffs? Is that what we're talking about here in terms of the two different approaches? Help us understand that if you can.
Yeah, and there is really only a certain level of detail I can get into. I think the best way to maybe explain as much as I can is that the President feels that tariffs are the best tool for a variety of economic objectives that he has, for creating barriers into the United States to encourage domestic production, for raising revenues, for some of the economic policies, including tax cuts and other things that he is seeking to achieve for his own economy, and to sort of leverage policy changes in other countries. And so he likes tariffs. He feels that they are very effective. He's always been a strong tariff proponent. He was when he was first in office, when we were renegotiating the NAFTA, and he continues to have that perspective. Canada is a country that, understands the values of tariffs, but we are also at our core a free trading nation. We believe that the Canadian economy is stronger, more robust, more resilient when we have broad partnerships, secure supply chains, and in strategic areas, self-sufficiency and self-assurance, but also that working with partners makes us more competitive. So and in broad strokes, I think that's sort of the philosophical difference. But I think our task is to find a path to achieve the ultimate goals of both of our countries, despite maybe these differences in preferences with respect to policy tools. And we'll see if we can do it. Okay. I believe that there's work to be done that we can get done.
Right. Well, and look, you, the Prime Minister, Minister LeBlanc, have all made it very clear the goal is a reset tariffs back to where they were before all of this, to get the tariffs off the table. But the President said he still believes in them, that he's a tariff person. So is there a world where Canada and the U.S. can get a deal that gets rid of the tariffs on us and President Trump can still have his tariffs with other countries? I mean, is that the landing point here as you maybe see it?
Look, our goal is to get the tariffs off for Canada. We will be pushing to get the tariffs off for Canada. We are going to try and find a path with the U.S. so that we can get to that place. I am not, I don't think that we're interested in really talking about another perspective. We understand that the tariffs are a policy that the President finds useful and that he may well find effective with other countries. We are working very, very hard to make the case that using those tariffs with us is not going to be as productive for the goals that he has than some other choices and avenues that we might be able to pursue.
And look, Ambassador, maybe this treads into you can't discuss what was said in the room, but do you think based on today and the acceleration that you're feeling and the being told to accelerate talks, as Minister LeBlanc described it, do you think you're on a path where you can get there? That there can be a world where a president who likes tariffs agrees not to put tariffs on Canada?
I sure hope so. I think we have all the arguments and all the data and all of the support, both in Canada and the U.S., that should help us get there. Whether we will get there or not, that remains to be seen. But I believe that we have an excellent case to make, and I'm looking to all Canadians, private sector, government at all levels across the country, to help us continue making that case.
And are you getting that sense of compromise and willingness from across the table? I mean, are you getting a sense that the Americans are willing to move on that as these talks go on?
I'll get back to you on that one.
Okay. All right. Look, Ambassador, I know time is tight, but you're going to be meeting with Jamieson Greer, the USTR, and others later this week, the U.S. Trade Representative. Are those talks going to be in Washington? I mean, what do you have? What clarity do you have at this point on what the next steps?
We're still working that out. We're working that out. We're going to meet later this week again. We had a good meeting again today. We may have some, more exchanges and conversations before we meet. So the exact form of that is not yet decided. We're kind of trying to work that out.
Okay, Ambassador Kirsten Hillman, I know you got to run. Thank you for making time for us on a busy day like today.
All right.
Mr. President, welcome to Canada.
Thank you very much.
It's a great honor. Happy birthday. A few days short.
A little bit.
A few days short, but didn't have a chance to see you on the day. This marks the 50th birthday of the G7, and the G7 is nothing without U.S. leadership, and your personal leadership of the United States.
I appreciate it, and we've developed a very good relationship, and we're going to be talking about trade and many other things. I think we have different concepts. I have a tariff concept, and Mark has a different concept, which is something that some people like. But we're going to see if we can get to the bottom of it today. I'm a tariff person. I've always been a tariff. It's simple, it's easy, it's precise, and it just goes very quickly. And I think Mark has a more complex idea, but also very good. So we're going to look at both, and we're going to see what we're going to come out with something, hopefully.
Okay, that was the bit of the meeting that was for public consumption. We got a better idea of how those talks went in private when Canada's ambassador to the United States, Kirsten Hillman, briefed reporters this afternoon.
We have a president who is very convinced of the policy that he has around tariffs in order to achieve some of his policy goals. We are very convinced that applying that policy to Canada is actually detrimental to his overall goals, and we are trying to get there with him and his officials so that they understand our perspective. We feel a sense of acceleration in the discussions in the last couple of weeks, and that is a very good thing.
Okay, it's time to bring in the power panel to talk about all of this. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative cabinet minister. Brad Levine is a former national campaign director for the NDP. And in Ottawa, in the studio, Vandana Cotter was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and Rob Russo is the Canada correspondent for The Economist. It's good to see you all. Hello from beautiful Banff. Lisa, you have come out of rooms as a cabinet minister with similar, I guess, instructions not to spill the beans as Dominic LeBlanc and Kirsten Hillman had today. What do we take from what we heard from the Prime Minister, from the President, and later from the Ambassador and the Minister?
I was watching the Prime Minister's body language, and I'm struck by the fact that it appeared that when President Trump mentioned something about how Canada has another way of looking at it or a larger concept, I swear I thought I saw the Prime Minister kind of wink to somebody off camera.
He did. He did wink. No, he winked at the camera. I don't know if it was off camera. It was definitely a wink.
And he kind of goes up on his tiptoes when he has something that he knows that nobody else knows. You'll see him do a little rock. And the other thing that I noticed was he had kind of like a Cheshire grin on at the very end when the president said that we may be getting there. So I may be just reading into all of this, but I think that there possibly is good news coming for Canada, or at least good news for the government in that they may have something to announce. I don't know whether or not the deal is going to be good for Canada. That's going to be up to the different sectors in the provinces to determine if it's a good deal or not. But it seems as if they may end up having an announcement coming out of this. And if it is, good on them.
Well, you know, Brad, there was no announcement out of it today, but, you know, the vibe, for lack of a better word, between the president and the prime minister, very good, first name basis, you know, with the president calling him Mark and no derogatory stuff. The ambassador and Dom LeBlanc said that they have been told to accelerate things, and they're going to meet later this week with the trade representative, Jameson Greer. So there's progress. We just don't know if there's progress on the material negotiations and the issues of play.
Yeah, I think that secondary meeting later in the week is significant, only because folks don't meet if there's nothing to talk about, and you know the fact that there's many things on the table, it takes more time than they have off to the side at a G7. So I think that's my first takeaway, is that there's an agreement to continue the conversation. Now, as to what, who knows? The acceleration is a positive thing. We wouldn't have heard that term unless there was some progress to accelerate. But what I found interesting is to what possibly could be agreed upon. I mean, this is a country that has broken its trade deal that the president himself signed by imposing these tariffs to begin with. But I found that your interview with the ambassador at the top of the show, very interesting. And she obviously could not say the things that you were asking her, and you were prefacing it with, I know you can't tell me. But she was very, very clear, and I think this was a bit of a hint, at least I took it away as a hint, where she said, we have to understand the U.S. administration's policy objectives. And she listed three. One was the desire to onshore U.S. jobs. The second was revenue for the U.S. Treasury. And third was policy changes within the tariffed countries themselves. And I found that to be very interesting. Could that be the menu for what could possibly lead to a complex thing that President Trump even himself mentioned, a bit more complex than the blunt instrument of tariffs? Could those elements be part of something that could inevitably lead to an agreement within the coming days or weeks?
You know, Vandana, Brad's got a point there, but there's also, when you look at those three, the warning to the U.S. is if you keep doing this, you're actually going to lose U.S. jobs, which means you're not going to get the revenue from tariffs. And some of the policy changes are, we're going to deepen defense partnerships and procurement with Europe and Asia and other things, and not with the United States, right? So I guess these are the areas of settlement one way or another, either as leverage points or as possible I don't want to say concession points, but negotiation points. What are your thoughts on everything we heard today?
Yeah, I think he definitely is using those points for leverage. I think he also is seeing that, politically speaking, the impact of his decisions on the U.S. economy. We saw Premier Holt talk about how Canadians are angry, and even just yesterday, I was at a grocery store and I heard a woman say, "Oh, blueberries from U.S., I'm not taking this." So Canadians are still rallying behind that. I heard from Susan Holt also that the meeting with the governors, also they're feeling the pressure. So, and I saw Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan saying the economy could be deteriorating. So I think Donald Trump is also feeling a lot of pressure. So I feel like that also helps with him in wanting to get a deal. It sounded like he was very positive about it. It sounded like he wanted something today or sometime this week. But I do think if we see something that comes out, if not this time, but very shortly afterwards.
Rob, what's your takeaway from what we saw and heard today?
Well, I too, like Brad, was struck by the words that that the Canadian side was trying to do something, to offer something to President Trump that would advance his policy goals. I'm struck by the difference in Mr. Trump's tone from when they first met in a bilateral in the White House. I think it was the 6th of May. He was asked in the Oval Office, is there anything that that Prime Minister Carney could say to you that would get you to drop tariffs? And he said, no, not at all, not a chance. Today, he said, well, Prime Minister Carney's got something that's more complex, not necessarily a bad thing, it could be a good thing, is the way he put it. He's willing to consider it. That's a significant change in tone, I would say, for a man who seems intent to tithe anybody who wants to access what is still the most lucrative conservative or consumer market in the world.
So, Lisa, what do we draw from that? Because, the last G7, the Canada hosted was in Charlevoix. And we all know how that went. And increasingly, as the Donald Trump G7s happened during his first term, they got more and more difficult to manage for the host country. The last one he went to was in France in 2019, I believe, where they just essentially decided, much like this one, no communique, let's just put out a statement from the chair on the common points. But things were getting worse with Canada during the first term as the years went on. Things seem to be getting better with Canada, at least rhetorically, and in that one-on-one relationship, even as steel and aluminum tariffs have doubled, right? The policy's gone in the wrong way, but the personality thing has gone in the right way. I don't know how to assess a dynamic like that.
Maybe, but maybe, David, that this is just a moment in time where the president has had a really rough week, and he just doesn't want to pick any more fights right now. So he is being as demure as Mr. Trump gets. I'll note the fact that he's wearing a Canada-US pin on his lapel, which I find really interesting. I've not seen that before coming from somebody that official. I think he may just not want to have a fight right now. Maybe he's just at the G7 and wants to skate through as much as he can. I'm hoping that it's a signal that we have a deal, but it could equally be the fact that he just has no fight in him right now, doesn't want to put up resistance, and we have to wait for another shoe to drop.
Yvonne, I want to circle back to you on that PIN issue, because we're told by the Prime Minister's office, not a PIN issue, but just to explain to people, this is not something that Canada handed out as the host nation to the countries. This is something Donald Trump just showed up with, and they were as surprised, I think, as everybody to see it. Now, it is weird because of the specific nature of this president and also the level of discipline in this Prime Minister's office that we're kind of interpreting body language of the Prime Minister, the subtext of the spoken word by the ambassador and the president. But it does tell us there are visible signs of progress, it seems, without an actual conclusion and without knowing the details of where we're headed on this.
Yeah, and like some of the observations I had from that bilateral is I think Mark Carney has figured out how to connect with Donald Trump, and he's had his career has been on the international perch for a long time. So I'm sure he's dealt with a number of personalities similar to Donald Trump over his career. I also think Donald Trump is someone who wants to be liked. President Trump wants to be liked. He likes to be admired. So if he's going to a place where he feels like he admires Mr. Carney, he's friends with people like the King of England. I think a number of these leaders already have friendships with him or relationships with him. So I feel like President Trump will want to be a part of that, actually. I don't think he wants to be disliked. I think he wants to govern from a place of power and strength and show strength to the U.S. He has to do that politically for his own base as well. But I do think he'll want to be a part of all this, and he wouldn't want to be the one who's the outlier when everyone else is coming together and forming new alliances.
Okay, so Brad, a counterpoint on the positivity here. There was a lot of energy put into trying to get something, hopefully, by the G7. And here we are at the G7, and there's going to be more meetings after the G7. It didn't get done in time. It didn't get done today. I'm not saying it's a catastrophe and a disaster. But if you have this sort of inflection point of the face-to-face meeting on Canadian soil as a target for a deal and you don't get it, should you be optimistic that it all comes together in the follow-up in 72 to 96 hours?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if, like, universally we should have been applying all this pressure to get a whole bunch of things done just because the G7 was on this date at this time. So I don't think that the domestic audiences of the leaders are going to be either, like, I think people, especially workers that are affected by these tariffs, if there is relief coming in the coming days and weeks, they're not going to look back and say that would have been nicer to be announced in Alberta during the G7. So,
Right.
you take the win when you can get it. And these are complicated matters. And listen, you got to take a look at the calendar here. I mean, 3 months ago, Carney was, at Brookfield, and now he's hosting the G7 as Prime Minister of Canada. So I think that the level of optimism, the speed with which things are being accelerated, is fairly good. Just quickly on the point of Trump and the difference of tone. Like, I think in the first term, I think he was learning on the job of what the power of the presidency was, and then when he came back after a 4-year break, I think he had a much different agenda as to how he would use the powers at his disposal to leverage things. And, he came out very strong in the opening hours of being president, even before he took the oath, versus, I think, in the first term, he was a lot slower and kind of learning. And I think he's learning a lot, and he's right. Implementing a lot of this. But the tremendous amount of leverage. Now, on the world, he's got all these tariffs. Canada still, well, the tariffs are still too high on Canada. They are the lowest, if not among the lowest, that he's already applied. To get a deal for Canada would then signal for him, he's promised his country a whole bunch of deals. He's got no deals yet. He's actually, I think, fairly hungry for a deal. And if he can get a good deal with Canada that meets these policy objectives that the ambassador hinted at the outset of the show, I think that sets him up for success when he negotiates with the rest of the world, because he's taken on the rest of the world, unlike the first term where he just picked selectively his tariff nation victims.
He's got to deal with
Brad,
the UK,
sometime
though.
in the last 20... Yeah, I was just going to say, sometime in the last 20, 30 minutes, the President and Prime Minister Keir Starmer of the United Kingdom, they signed something. I think it's the cementing or formalizing of essentially the term sheet they reached earlier in the year, but it also doesn't include steel and aluminum tariffs, so it's unclear how far-reaching it goes. But just during the commercial break, we got the official readout from the Prime Minister's office on his meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump, and there's a key bit of news in there about the acceleration of talks. It says, to that end, the leaders agreed to pursue negotiations toward a deal within the coming 30 days. So, Rob, just your thoughts on that. They said it was accelerated in various scrums. They wouldn't give us a timeline, but here in the readout, 30 days. Yeah,
nothing concentrates the mind of a miscreant like a hanging at noon, or a journalist like a deadline in 30 days. And it's, I think this is the two leaders saying, okay, the clock is actually now ticking. It puts pressure on both sides, but welcome news. Welcome news in that it's going to force both governments to bring their biggest guns to the table and to have this discussion in a serious and meticulous way. I actually think it's good news.
Okay, just a quick round on that. Lisa, your thoughts on this? Like, Mark Carney's tried to get a bunch of things done by Canada Day. Maybe now they'll get this done by, Bastille Day, and, to use national holidays. Your thoughts?
Yeah, he's not afraid of giving deadlines, is he? I mean, that is something that politicians tend to stay away from, because you can be held to account, quite frankly. So I'm glad to see that there is a time frame that they've put in place. It could be ambitious, consequential events could happen in the meantime, and who knows what's going to end up happening. But it's such a follow the bouncing ball kind of issue, meaning that I don't know whether or not we believe in 30 days we're actually going to have something, because we're dealing with a president who goes in and out of tariffs on 30-day spins like it's no tomorrow. So I'm hopeful, but let's see what brings 30 days.
But, Vandana, putting 30 days in writing and a readout suggests there's an optimism they can get there, right? Or, or that is like the line in the sand time. I mean, how do you read that time frame?
I think Mark Carney doesn't put things on paper like that unless he's very, very, very sure of himself. So I would think that it tells me that probably a lot of the meat of what they want to agree to, they have agreed in principle, and they have to get through some details over the next 30 days. I think when it comes to deadlines, he really believes in the follow through of what politicians say. I know we cannot control Donald Trump. He is very volatile. He's not predictable. But I do think it tells me that he feels very confident in the breadth of what they're talking about, and that it only matters of a few details to carry it through.
Brad, your thoughts?
Well, this is going to call for, I think, some discipline on this front. Knowing that there's a timeline and knowing that there's very likely an agreement coming gives some assurance to the country. Now, what people will do is they'll start attaching that which they wish to see in such an agreement now that there's a framework. So when it's behind closed doors and you don't know, and then all of a sudden we've got a deal and here it is, and everyone goes, yay, now you kind of say, okay, you got 30 days. So look for stakeholders throughout the country, the premiers, mayors of large centers, captains of key sectors of industry to begin to jump in to offer their friendly advice in the public forum as to what the shape and form of such an agreement within this time frame should look like.
David, if I can, one other thing that a 30-day deadline does is I think it will accelerate the Prime Minister's plan, if this goes wrong, to swiftly and with great determination look for other markets. He is quite resolved to do that. If this thing goes sideways, the restructuring begins. It will take years, without a doubt, but it will say, okay, now we must begin. And it will, the pivot away from the United States, which is going to be very, very difficult, begins after 30 days.
I think to add to Rob's point, too,
even in the 30 days. Sorry, Vandana, because he's got like the NATO summit and the EU summit coming up in June. Right. So sorry, go ahead, Vandana. I didn't mean to
just strike when the iron's hot. If they feel like they have a great relationship, if they feel like Donald Trump is confident in the relationship, and he's already saying that while it's a complex idea, he's complimentary of Mark Carney's idea, a deadline is the best way to get it forward. Any amount of time, other things can happen in the world, other things can happen in the U.S., moods can change, and I think he feels like the shorter timeline, the better to get it across.